The celebrated author H.G. Wells once said, "Human history becomes more and more a race between education and catastrophe." In 1441, a mere century after the bubonic plague had decimated Europe, and 200 years after King Afonso III had expelled the last of the Moors from Portugal, the explorer Nuno Tristão was given a perilous new mission: to further explore the shores of Western Africa and find and bring back anything that could help them cement their newly won freedom from the Moors, who still had a stronghold in Spain. As the saying goes, hard times create strong men, and Tristão was as hardened as they came. And it is these qualities that would set the explorer in a confrontation with the naval arm of one of the most revered African empires. Help keep our channel independent by supporting us on Patreon, becoming a member, and by sharing our videos with your loved ones. As the African saying goes, no contribution is too small. Tristão, the seldom-mentioned Portuguese explorer, was quick to answer the call to adventure. His mission was part of the colossal endeavor of Prince Henry the Navigator, whose life goal was the exploration of Africa. For this, he amassed cartographers, astronomers, shipbuilders, technologies that had been introduced into Europe by the Moors. In fact, the lateen sail, the most defining technology of the marquee Portuguese ship, had been in use by the Arabs since the 7th century. This turned Portuguese ships into swift and capable vessels and extended the limit of their exploration capabilities. And it is with one of these ships, the Caravel, and accompanied by a Moorish translator, that Nuno Tristão would initiate a series of daring missions all along the western coast of Africa, trying to establish trade routes around the Islamic Empire. As they begin to venture south of the Mediterranean, they encounter new lands and new people. In 1441 and 1444, Tristão is able to raid coastal villages in western Sahara and Arguin Island in present-day Mauritania, where Berber tribes lived. It is there that he sees a few of the inhabitants that he promptly brings back to Portugal as captives. Their early successes in coastal raids in the Bay of Arguin in Mauritania gives them confidence. Multiple subsequent raids are launched, and by 1445, the Berber fishing settlements are devastated. Prince Henry the Navigator pressed Tristão to push further south so that they may get more converts to Christianity, which at the time was badly needed to counter the influence and strength of Islam at its Spanish borders. Prince Henry also tried, but unsuccessfully, to stop the explorer from taking black captives. This fell on deaf ears to the explorers who were making significant fortunes on the trades. What the Portuguese didn't know is that these early raids on the Berber towns were in no way an indication of what they would find further south. Now, of course, the Portuguese were already all too familiar with Africans, that they called the blacks. From the invasion of the Iberian Peninsula in the 8th century, Spanish and Portuguese natives had seen waves upon waves of the Arabo-African coalition they called the Moors. The Western African nations that had converted to Islam had participated en masse to the Islamic invasion of Spain and Portugal. It is from these that we get these Africoid depictions of the Moors, especially after the 9th century. See their depictions for yourselves. But here we have to be clear. Over the 700-year period of the invasion of the Iberian Peninsula by the Islamic Empire, not all Moors were blacks. And the original Moors were of Arabic descent, before their ranks were reinforced by North Africans, Arabs, Berbers, and blacks. This is what prompted Nuno Tristão to declare, "I have discovered the land of the blacks," in 1445 when he had finally reached the coast of Senegal. Bad weather had prevented him from venturing deeper inland, so he returned to Portugal. Tristão had in fact come in contact with the Malio-Songhai Empire. This empire spread across 1.2 million square kilometers, as large as France, Spain, and Italy combined. This very empire that, a century before, had given the world richest man ever, Mansa Musa, but also his cousin King Abubakar, the king who had set sail across the Atlantic in search of new trade routes. Because of Mansa Musa, the Mali Empire is predominantly known for its abundant gold which it acquired through mining and trade. But this medieval empire's genius extended well beyond its wealth to its architecture, art, and the military. And it is the latter that enabled Mali to expand and defend its borders for 450 years. And it is the naval branch of this military that Nuno Tristão would clash against when he attempted his fourth voyage. Medieval military Mali was as sophisticated as they come. One had to be when they had Maghreb empires to the north, the Songhai Empire to the east, and Benin to the south, complete with its infantry and horse-mounted knights. Along with the Tontigi, its bread-and-butter infantrymen, you'd find Horon horsemen, which were usually from the citizenry. Now these Horon were the cream of the crop, including princes and other high-class gents. With the Arabian-bred horses, it fell to the Tontigi or the Mansa to provide the Mandakalu horsemen with their steeds. These fellows would go into battle with lances, sabers, and hefty long swords. Chainmail and iron helmets were common features and would also be at their disposal, decked out to the nines. The Mandakalu were able to gather a standing cavalry of about 10,000 horsemen by the time Mansa Musa was holding the reins. With that kind of firepower, the Mansa could flex his muscle from what's now known as Senegal all the way to the borders of today's Nigeria. With this military tradition came a long line of crafty and very strategic rulers and generals from the Malio-Songhai traditions. Rulers like Sundiata Keita, the boy who overcame infirmity to become king; to Soni Ali, the tyrant who was more vicious than Genghis Khan; to Askia Muhammad, the king who could not lose a battle; and Mansa Musa, the conqueror. Mali and Songhai were really renowned for their tactical acuity, and they displayed this mastery both on land but also at sea. Suni Ali, for example, was adept at using the Niger River as a veritable highway for his forces, thereby turning the tide of wars by creating unpredictable flanks on his enemies. Infantry was equipped with the famous Takuba sword. Revered by all for its strength and swiftness, the Takuba sword was really a product of the iron and steel smelting expertise of the Africans. This tradition gave rise to some of the most beautiful metal sculptures in history. We will cover these in a future episode. But that same expertise gave their knight armor protection, and their archers a deadly edge with their poisoned arrows. All of this would have been foreign to Nuno Tristão and his crew of 22 when his caravel arrived on the shores of Senegambia in 1446. They came to the mouth of what seems to be the Senegal River. Too shallow for the ships, they launched their canoes and set out upriver with all but 4 of the crewmen who remained on the ship. And here, the account of their encounter with the men from Mali is best told by Gomes Llanes de Zurara in his diary, The History of the Discovery and Conquest of Guinea. And it reads as follows, quote, "And passing by Cape Verde, he went 60 leagues further on and came unto a river, in the which it seemed to him that there ought to be some inhabited places. Wherefore he caused to be launched 2 small boats he was carrying, and in them there entered 22 men, to wit, 10 in one and 12 in the other. And as they began to take their way up the river, the tide was rising with the which they entered, and they made for some habitations that they espied on the right hand. And it came to pass that before they went on shore, there appeared from the other side 12 boats, in the which there would be as many as 70 or 80 guineas, all Negroes, with bows in their hands. And because the water was rising, one of the boats of the Guineas crossed to the other side and put on shore those it was carrying, and thence they began to shoot arrows at our men in the boats. And the others who remained in the boats bestirred themselves as much as they could to get at our men, and as soon as they perceived themselves to be within reach, they discharged that accursed ammunition of theirs, all full of poison, upon the bodies of our countrymen." End quote. Popular media has done a great disservice to native African technologies and approaches by labeling everything that the African did as backwards. If we remove these labels and look at the technologies that the Senegambians were utilizing, we will see that they had very long-range archers. Their archers, just like the Nubians, were also extremely accurate. Anyone that has ever tried archery knows how hard it is to hit a target 80 yards out, let alone a moving target, while on a boat. The poisoned arrow, often ridiculed, had effectively protected African empires for centuries. And this Mali variant was so effective that even a graze from one of these arrows was enough to seal the fate of the enemy in as much as 6 minutes. African speed canoes are another technology that was often mocked. And yet it is so effective at navigating river waters and coastal waters alike, at incredible speeds. This tradition has been maintained and is still very present in today's Senegal and Mali. See how fast traditional Mali canoes are, and imagine one of them closing in on you. It is that sight that Tristao's men saw as they tried to escape the ambush. The whole encounter, the speed at which it happened, shows that this was a well-rehearsed maneuver. All this points to a disciplined military unit, a coordinated unit. Gomez Ayans continues his account, and I quote, "And so they held on in pursuit of them until they had reached the caravel which was lying outside the river in the open sea. And they were all hit by those poisoned arrows, in such wise that before they came on board, 4 of them died in the boats. And so, wounded as they were, they made fast their small boats to the ship and commenced to make ready for their voyage, seeing their case, how perilous it was. But they were not able to lift their anchors for the multitude of arrows with which they were attacked, and they were constrained to cut the cables so that not one remained. And so they began to make sail, leaving the boats behind, for they could not hoist them up. And it came to pass that of the 22 men that left the ship only 2 escaped, to wit, one André Diaz and another Alvaro da Costa, both esquires of the infant and natives of the city of Evora, and the remaining 19 died, for that poison was so artfully composed that a slight wound, if it only let blood, brought men to their last end. And there died that noble knight Nuno Tristam, very desirous as he was of this present life, in that there was no place left him to buy his death like a brave man. And there died also another knight called John Correa, and one Duarte d'Olanda, and Estevam d'Almeida, and Diego Machado, men of noble birth and young in years, brought up by the infant in his household, as well as other esquires and foot soldiers of the same upbringing, and seamen and others of the ship's company. Suffice it to say that they numbered in all 21, for of the 7 that had remained in the caravel, 2 were also wounded as they were trying to raise the anchors. But whom will you have to make ready? And 4 remained in the boats, and 2 they threw in the next day. But I write not of the feelings that would be theirs when they cast those bodies upon the multitude of waters, burying their flesh in the bellies of fish." End quote. The harrowing encounter taught the Portuguese a few things. One, that the medieval African empires were far more advanced than they expected. Their technology, organization, and military acumen were such that it would require a different approach if they wanted to trade. Europeans would not be able to effectively make military inroads into Africa until the mass production of the firearm. The same firearm which the Arabic Empire employed to set about the demise of the Mali Empire. Yet still, even the Arabs with their firearms could not maintain the territory for long. In 1456, after having sustained multiple casualties in failed raids, the Portuguese finally settled for diplomacy with the Mali Empire, as attested by Professor John Thornton. Quote, "The Europeans had little success in their seaborne attacks on the mainland. As a result, the Europeans had to abandon the time-honored tradition of raiding and substitute a relationship based more or less completely on peaceful, regulated trade." End quote. This is one of the many important victories in the African resistance against colonization. I will leave you with a few images of Malio Songhai soldiers, weaponry, and art. Your support on Patreon means the world to us, and it helps us share more of our history so that the next generation doesn't grow up believing that they are without history. Don't miss our previous episode on the oldest man-made structures in history being in Africa. Join us and see how those who are said to be without history birthed civilization itself.